Hello, everybody, and welcome. So in this video, I want to walk through how we can extract certain observations from a data frame that satisfies certain conditions. And so the data set that we're going to be working with in this video is the storms data set, which can be found in the R package dplyr. So the exercise that we're going to walk through right here, this R markdown file is called reading O2 filtering and subset.rmd. You can find this markdown file in Canvas. I'm going to work up the solutions to this in this video. So this storms data set is in this dplyr package. So I'm assuming that this has been installed and we need to load the library of data sets and functions if we want to access them. So we want to access the storms data set. So I'm going to run this first code cell to load the library of data and functions in that package. And now we'll have access to the storms data set. And we've been working with this data set in class. But if you want to refresh your memory about what data is included in that data set, we can run a question mark storms. That's going to open up help documentation in the help window. I'll just zoom in on that for a second. And you can see where the data comes from, what is in the data set, how many observations we have. And what we're going to be working with today is how could we answer a question like what month, if I want to compare storm wind speed in, say, July and August, 2 months where we have a lot of observations, in which month are the storms stronger, July or August? And so this data set storms has information from all storms in all months over this period. So they're all chunked together. So what we're going to try and do is extract out just the observations that have the month variable equal to 7, which is July, or possibly 8, which is August. And then from those observations, we're going to want to compare wind speeds of storms in July and August. So I'm going to crunch down this side of the window so that we could just focus on the middle section of our studio where we're working with this markdown document. So if we want to calculate the mean of all, the mean wind speed of all storms in this data set, we can simply use the mean function. And then we're using the storms data set. Recall we use the $sign to then indicate which variable from that data frame are we going to calculate the mean of. So running this code, we can see here that the mean wind speed for all storms in this data set was 53.63774 knots. So the units for wind speed here are being measured in knots. Okay, but let's say we, instead of looking at the mean of all storms, we just want to hone in on storms that occurred in August and compare that to storms that occurred in July. So what we'd want to do is go into this data set storms and pull out just the observations that have month equal to July, and then again, pull out just the observations that have month equal to August. And in this data set, we've coded the months by an integer, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 12. So there are a couple of different ways that we can do this. So I want to illustrate them. So one very useful function for doing this is what's called the filter function. And so how we run the filter function is we first input a data frame that we're going to filter from, and then we indicate what is the condition that is going to determine which observations are going to get pulled into this data frame that we're calling July. And so we want the variable month to equal 7. And notice here, I've put a double equal sign, and that's for the logical comparison of equality. If you put one equal sign, just recall that's usually used for setting options or possibly assigning objects in R. So when we're doing logical comparisons with equality, we put 2 equal signs. So this is going to say, look at the month variable and find all of the observations in the month column that have month equal to 7, meaning July. And this filter command is from the dplyr package. And if we run this, keep in mind, we don't necessarily see anything in the background. because the output has been stored in July. And so if we actually want to take a look at what that just did, let me insert a new line over here. And insert a code cell. And let me just look at the first 6 rows of this new data frame that we created, July. And we can see that this has just observations from the month of July. And if you want to look at the end of this data set, then we can do tail and take a look at the end of this data set. And we can see that it also just has months of July in this data set. And we have a much smaller data set, data frame here. Let's run a summary on this entire data frame. And we can see here we've got a total of like 923 observations. The original data set had almost 12,000 observations. So here we've pared down the observations. Okay, another way to do this is using the subset function. And the subset function, we don't need any special package for. That's in what we call base R. So when you install R, by default, this function subset is going to be in your kind of repertoire of functions that you can use. And it looks very, very similar to the filter. We do subset storms. We first enter the data frame, and then we enter the condition. So this is exactly the same as the command that we had above. And at this point, let me just compare this to the previous one. We're going to call this July version 2. So we're going to store this someplace else. And then let's take a look at what the structure of this resulting object is going to look like. So I'm going to look at the first 6 rows of this resulting data set, and it looks exactly the same as the output that we got when we ran the filter command. So subset and filter, they work exactly the same. What's nice about this subset function is that if we want to just compare the wind speeds for each month, then I don't necessarily need to pull off all of these other variables when I subset the data set. I don't necessarily care about the latitude and the longitude and the status in the category. We are just interested in the wind speed. So there's an extra option that I can enter that says, okay, subset the storms data set. I want to pull off the wind variable for just the observations that have month equal to 7. And again, we use the double $ for the logical test. And now let's take a look at July.wind. And so running this command, we can see we pulled off just the wind observations from July, and we don't even see the month in here because the only thing we've kept are the wind variable. So this is now a data frame that has just one row, and I can tell that it's a data frame because I can see this label of that, this label on this one column that we have. So we've got a data frame that has just one column. And in some cases, when we're working in R, it might be nicer if we store this data in a vector as opposed to a data frame. So if you want to store these results as just a vector of values, then this option at the end, which is drop is equal to T, you could write that as drop is equal to true as well. That's what that T means. So this is going into the storms data frame, pulling off the wind variable for the months that correspond to only July. And let's not worry about keeping the data frame structure for this. And now let's take a look at what happens if I do head July wind back. Let's see what the output of this looks like. And now it's just listed as a vector, right? It almost looks like a row of values and there's no header. So sometimes it'll be nice to just have a vector of values, since some functions in R only accept vectors as opposed to data frames. But you have an option to keep the data frame structure or to convert it to a vector, which is nice with this subset command. And the last way I want to explain how to do this is we don't need any of those functions. We could just use logical statements if we want to. And I'll just say that this method requires the most proficiency with coding and R, So you don't have to do it this way, and you can see why these nice built-in functions make programming are a little bit simpler. But what's nice about this method is it lends itself to fitting into for loops or conditional tests. We have a little bit more control over how this data set is being split when we're entering all of the specifics ourselves. But in any case, this is saying go into the storms data set and pull off the observations inside of that data set. This is saying, first of all, pull off all of the rows of the storms data set where the month value is equal to 7. And the fact that I don't have anything after this comma means pull off all of the columns. So this says keep just the rows that have a month equal to 7. And for those rows, we're going to keep all of the columns of data that we have. So let's take a look at what happens if we take a look at the first couple rows of July logic. Awesome. Okay, now we've got the same, just the 7 months or the months that are equal to 7, and we've kept all of the variables. So whether I want to use logical statements, subset, or filter, that's for you to decide. Just keep in mind, if you want to use that filter function that we used first, that's going to require that you have the dplyr package loaded into your R session. And so now we've got this data for July. We've done this in many different ways, but if I want to compute the mean and the median wind speed of storms in July, then what I can do is now mean July and wind. Since that was the first way, this first July data frame was the one that we got using the filter command. And we can calculate that. So the mean wind speed for storms in July was about 42 knots. And let's compare that to, say, the median wind speed of the storms that occurred in July. And that function is median. And running that, we can see that the median wind speed was 40 knots. And so we see that the mean wind speed is bigger than the median wind speed. So that tells me that we seem to have outliers that are on the right, that are on the upper end, that are pulling the mean above the median. So there must be some storms in July that were uncharacteristically high wind, and that's why we're seeing the mean pulled up. But what this 40 is saying is half of the storms in July had a wind speed of less than 40 knots. Roughly half of the storms that occurred in July have a wind speed that is more than 40 knots.